We're back for the next panel after an amazing talk on DeFi. We're now going to be talking about what it takes to move from the Web 2 to the Web 3 as a developer or as any other particular role that you may have. So to help me on this panel, we have Pedro, who's co-founder of Talent Protocol. Also Henrique, who's a senior developer at Dune Analytics, and Ian from the recruitment team at Protocol Labs. Welcome, Henrique. Welcome, Ian. We're missing Pedro, who should be joining shortly. Hi, Pedro. I think we're all here. Welcome, everyone. So let's get this started. Time is gonna fly, so I'll give you hints on whether you should kind of once I need you to kind of be more short in terms of your answers, I'll let you know. But other than that, feel free to expose your points of view. So just starting by Pedro. Pedro, you have an interesting background because you actually started a recruitment company called sorry. Called help me out here, I just forgot.
Landing Jobs, man.
Landing Jobs, sorry. Called Landing Jobs, which I've actually used in the past. Yes. So you started a company in the Web 2 space for recruitment, and you're now you now left that behind and you moved to the Web 3 space with Talent Protocol, again on the talent space. So my question to you that kind of made that progression, how was your path from kind of being in a Web 2 industry and then moving to the Web 3 industry? What took you to take that step, and how did you? What challenges did you face, and how do you end up being able to create this new project?
All right. First off, thank you for setting this up, the hackathon, this panel, and inviting me over. Pleasure to be here with you and the rest of the people. A bit of context on your question. So it's pretty clear to me I want to be a founder, a builder throughout my life. I like to build things. I like to build teams as well, to build things, especially in the HR technology space. So my kind of like life purpose is to create tooling or technology that allows people to have more purposeful careers and lives, and also more productive work and produce more productive work. So having that in mind, after Landing Jobs, I was there for 8+ years. I moved to a non-exec board member role, and I decided to do a sabbatical. So jumping into Web3 was a bit random, but at the same time planned, because I wanted to go deeper into blockchain technology for a while. Just from a mindset perspective, when you're building a startup, you're all in on focus mode, and doing the sabbatical allowed me to go from focus mode to diffuse mode. And when I started to do that, I fell down the rabbit hole, as people say, and started to realize, how amazing this world is. Also it's still early days, so there's a lot of things to be done, of course. And I had this super old idea, more than 10 years old, was archived somewhere in my brain about, people should be able to be vested into other people's careers somehow. And when I bumped into Web3, I realized, well, with social tokens, and we can try this out. So we set out to build Talent Protocol, which is being built in public, open source, and through Seasons, which is a time-bound iteration system. And we're testing how to do this. Protocol Labs is one of our partners and investors as well, alongside other people. And what was your second question? or did I answer the second question?
No, I mean, the second question was around the challenges that you faced coming into the Web3 area, which has its own networks, its own kind of people, its own way of doing things, which is very different from Web2.
It's very different.
So how did you face those challenges?
All right. First off, everything happened super fast. So I thought that, building a startup in Web2 was already 10x faster than anything else in corporate world, and then I come into Web3 and it's 10x from the Web2. So that was a big difference, and also the role that is expected from a CEO or a founder is massively different. The economic value systems, the economic dynamics around the community, the metrics that matter the most for the organization, for the community, are totally different. So I had to do a mindset readjustment last year. But for me, and taking into consideration who I am and how I behave and the things I believe, it made total sense for me. So it was an easy mindset adjustment for me. Yeah.
Eric, you kind of, I'm going to go with similar questions, but you have a different background. So you started kind of as a postdoc at Microsoft, you worked at startups, you worked at Google, you worked at JP Morgan, and now you're at Dune Analytics. It's been quite a ride for you, I'm sure. Having gone through all of those different jobs, different things, like how did you evolve from working on, what are the differences from working in a typical Web2 startup versus the kind of more corporate world versus now Web3, where you're a tech lead in one of the fastest growing Web3 kind of startups. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey and kind of any challenges that you faced as you moved from the Web2 space to the Web3 space?
Yeah, of course. So hello, everyone. Yeah, it was probably not a typical journey, and it was not necessarily a conscious decision to get into Web3. It just happened in some way. Honestly, I think like we can trace it back to my years as a PhD student, where my research was focused on, consensus protocols way before, Bitcoin even existed. Before, the problem, took such an importance into the world as it has today. So in a way, I was always interested, in crypto and blockchain, but more from an academic and, more protocol-focused perspective. Protocol, I mean, like in the sense of, the actual consensus protocols that power the blockchain. But after I finished my PhD, I went off into a very different direction. As I said, I went to Microsoft Research, where I did research on distributed database systems. I was at Google, where I was a tech lead and manager for Google Docs for the backend team, very focused on storage as well. It was only after Google that I got back into, blockchain, and I went to JP Morgan. As you said, but not to work on any banking stuff, but to work on their blockchain product, Quorum, and particularly to do research on consensus protocols for Quorum. And it was after that I joined Dune Analytics, which is, is not strictly like a Web3 product, is more like an analytics platform for crypto data, for blockchain data. So I don't know, it wasn't really like a conscious decision, now I'm going to be a developer on Web3, I'm going to work on this. It kind of just happened. I was already working on this. In fact, we can trace it back again, like to more than 10 years ago, when I was doing my PhD research. It's just at some point people started calling it Web3, and here I am.
Yeah. As an engineer, and I'm sure you work with I don't know if all the engineers that you work with have been working in distributed systems or Web3 for a long time, or if some have made the jump from Web2 to Web3 recently or not. But do you have a sense of as an engineer, as a developer, how are those two worlds different, and what kind of, what is there a kind of a different mindset? Are there different challenges? Can you give us a glimpse of that?
Yeah, I suppose. So one thing that I see, I mean, like I do a lot of recruiting for Dune, so I end up interviewing a lot of candidates and talking to a lot of people and try to understand their motivations to getting into Web3 and to getting into Dune specifically. I mean, one of the most interesting things you see is that like there's a significant generation gap between people who are excited and want to get into Web3 and people who are the opposite or are not that interested. I mean, if I talk to most of my previous colleagues at Google, for instance, most of them, they're not even like fully aware of what's going on in this space. And to them, like crypto is still like this thing that's kind of esoteric in some way. So one is that generation gap for sure between people who are excited into Web3. But the other one, more technical and I guess more economic based, is that it's just a differently fundamental way of thinking about things and building things. And I feel like we're still scratching the surface, and there's still like a lot of trial and error experimentation here. With the blockchains, with DAOs, we have a fundamental different way of building things. The blockchain, essentially, in my view, is a this gets thrown around a lot, but I don't think it gets enough attention. Is a universal computer. It's a fundamentally new computing model that gives us different properties. Sure, it doesn't have the same performance characteristics as the cloud, but it gives you many interesting things and opens many novel ways of building stuff. So we're still scratching the surface there, and I believe we see a lot of innovation and a lot of new ways of building things, building systems, building products that are going to surface in the future.
I'm happy you mentioned two things that I agree are kind of critical here, which is it is a generational thing in a way. And it's also the vision of the global computer or the global computing platform is key, because it's, as you said, it's a different paradigm when you're thinking about developing applications and coding and so on. In a way, it reminds me a little bit, and I've known you for, I don't know how many years now, so you know what I'm talking about, like the beginnings of the internet and the beginnings of the web space and all that, which was very chaotic, and most people were completely unaware of what was happening, but there was clearly something happening that changed the world. And I think that's what we're seeing now again. It's a shift in paradigm and a shift in ways of doing things. Ian, I'm going to go to you now. So as someone recruiting for Protocol Labs, I'm sure I probably don't need to tell you that there's a bit of a war on talent going on in this space. We've already talked in a previous session that there aren't that many developers, Web3 developers, mainly when you're talking about languages like Solidity and kind of the core stuff of Web3. There aren't that many really good developers. So there's a huge war on talent. Can you share your perspective on that, and also whether there are some specific trends that you've been seeing on that front?
Yeah, 100%. So you are definitely right, Carlos, that there's a war on talent, and it's accelerating too. It's accelerating faster than I think anybody could have imagined with the amount of talent that's starting to become interested in this space. So I would say the main trend that I've seen really is that, whereas I worked at Facebook, sort of the figurehead Web2 company before shifting to Web3, and I'd say one of the main changes is that in Web2, it was a lot more about trying to find like the exact profile for a job that we had open. We have this position open, let's find the skill set and get someone in who can sort of work on that day one. There's exceptions to that, but for the most part, as a recruiter, that's what we were trying to do. Web3 is much more because of your point, Carlos, that there aren't a lot of developers or a lot of talent in this space yet, about thinking about how to develop and train people into positions, which is a really refreshing change for me working in recruiting, actually thinking about someone's potential and someone's like aptitude to get up to speed on something, as opposed to just their skill set coming into a role. So that obviously opens up this whole new sort of way of applying for positions, about making yourself sort of appealing for a position to a recruiting team, because it's not all about having 10 years of Java experience. It's about what have you done to learn about this space, and what have you shown that can sort of indicate that you'll get up to speed very quickly. So I'd say that's one of the main trends I've seen. One of the other trends I've seen is that like companies have shifted to be a lot more global very, very quickly. And part of this was the pandemic as well, but there's a lot of companies in Web3, Protocol Labs included, that are completely decentralized. So we're spread across the entire world. And in a Web2 world, it was very much like, okay, you need to move to the Bay Area to make Bay Area money, or you need to move to New York to make New York money. And this was especially difficult for me because I'm located in the Midwest in Wisconsin here, so very different environment than Silicon Valley. But the thing that I really love about Web3 and another trend here is that now we can hire talent anywhere, and we pay the same regardless of where you are in the world. If you're in Silicon Valley, if you're in Wisconsin, if you're in Nigeria, if you're in Australia, you get the exact same pay for the exact same work that you're doing for us. And I think that's a really, really awesome trend, and like attracts more talent to this space, knowing that there's not like that implicit bias in the interview process that's going to sort of, benefit others. Some people are, and not others, I should say. But hopefully that answered your question.
It did. You mentioned that part of your job now is to kind of to identify specific points that point you towards future potential of being a good developer or a good kind of candidate for a Web3 company. Can you share with us, like, what are you looking for when you're looking at more kind of Web2 oriented developers, and how do you kind of identify whether they will kind of jump to the Web3 space well? Can you give us some indication of that?
Yeah. So I'll start out by like Web2 specific things that we sort of look for, or a few indicators, and then I can talk maybe a little bit about some Web3 things that have people sort of dipping their toes in this space, hackathons being one of them. So great that we're here today. But in the Web2 space, we look for people who have operated in different industries and very fast-paced environments, first of all, because as Pedro and Enrique mentioned, like, this is incredibly fast-paced in Web3. Things are literally changing and evolving every single day. So being able to move and operate in that environment is super, super important. So it doesn't mean you have to have worked at a startup, but like showing something in your profile or your background that shows that you have that aptitude to like work and learn very quickly is super, super important. The second thing, which I sort of alluded to a little bit, was like being able to work in an asynchronous or completely remote environment. Like I think a lot of people just sort of assume that everyone can do that now because of the pandemic, but especially in like a development environment, not everyone can do that. A lot of people are used to going into an office prior to the pandemic and like working next to other engineers and collaborating with them. And it's definitely sort of a different beast to like be completely remote and having to sort of communicate with people across the globe in different time zones. Like looking for some sort of indication of someone's aptitude to be able to do that is also super impressive, or super important, I should say. And then the third thing in Web2 backgrounds is we look for a multitude of technologies that someone has exposure to or aptitude with, as opposed to like one specific thing. And I say like technologies in general because we look for people who can get up to speed on different things quickly, because there's a lot of open source technologies, there's a lot of new technologies in this space. There's probably things being developed right now that I'm not even aware of that we could be using in 3 to 6 months. So like we need people who can sort of jump in and be able to pick up those things very quickly. And then the last point that I'll make, Carlos, is just that we also look for people who have some sort of interest in Web3. Hackathons, participation in hackathons is great. Just sort of indicated research in this space, like self-directed research, whether it's just like, I have an interest in blockchain or Web3, or have an interest in this, as just sort of like a flag saying like, hey, like I'm trying to maybe dip my toes in that space, as opposed to just like nothing like that. Because whereas there isn't a lot of talent in Web3 currently, there's 50 to 60 million engineers in Web2 or other traditional industries. Like any sort of thing to sort of like put that flag up is super important from a recruiting perspective.
Thank you. That's great. That's exactly the kind of insight that I wanted to get from you. Pedro, going back to you. So we've had a lot of people chatting on this webinar about like, how should I start? Where do I go to for kind of resources and so on? So I think we can actually discuss that. So for people that are new to the space, how do you see kind of what are the best ways to orient themselves and find opportunities, and kind of where should they look at for resources, not only from a technical perspective, but also from kind of how do I find a job? Can you give us some insights into that?
Sure. So from a learning perspective first, I'm going to split the learning from the job searching one, if you don't mind. So learning perspective, for instance, what I did, I coded a little bit on Solidity as well when I was jumping into this world, So, but I went on Coursera and those types of course, and now that I've been in the space for a little bit, my advice is different. So there's a lot of different cups of tea, depending on who you are. So for ladies, I advise Surge. There's others like Web3 Baddies and other groups, but it's a sort of community. So if it's not for extroverts, but if you have more of a community vibe, then Surge is a good one. I'll drop the link in a bit. If you are you have more you're willing to go on hackathons or something like that, but you don't have the money, then there's Padawan DAO, which actually Talent Protocol, we're backers of their DAO, which supports people to go on hackathons. I think they supported several people to go on ETH Denver, which is happening right now. So that's a cool one. There's a bit more like broad ones, like the famous Rabbit Hole, and Odyssey DAO is doing some interesting things in this space. If you want to have approach like you already know something, and this is a good take to go into searching a job, Gitcoin is a nice one to get paid to to contribute to different projects, or even submit yours and get a grant. And there's like on my list, I have a couple more, but I'll only say like Kernel. I really love Kernel. I'm part of Kernel. As a community, it's just, it's fucking amazing. Like people have very good vibes, and it reminds me of like a Web2 yoga station or something like that. It's really cool. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to learn. All right. And the more you go deeper, the more things you'll discover. So I bet Protocol Labs has their own program as well. So, there's actually, I should add it to this list, but I'll check that later. But when it comes to job searching, now this is where it comes like different approaches. And unfortunately, a lot of the job searching is still done in a Web2 manner in Web3. So job posts, apply. It's a Web2 approach, something we are, or that we can potentially revamp with Talent Protocol in the future, not for the time being, but something that we can potentially go there. So you have a lot of job boards, whether in these communities I just mentioned, but there's others that are blockchain focused. Okay, I'll drop a link or two afterwards about this. But for me, my favorite one, and taking into DAOs, which is, it's a fairly recent thing. It's been around for a while, But the same way Enrique was saying that Web3, it became Web3 for, actually I have a theory why it became Web3, but the DAOs is also like a bit of, there's a bit of exaggeration around DAOs, but it is indeed true that you can join projects or DAOs and do collect bounties, and when you collect bounties is through work, and eventually you can get invited into the leadership teams or the contributors to become more of a contributor. And I believe this is a more organic way to find a job in Web3, together with what I mentioned before about Gitcoin. So yeah, this is my answer. I'll drop some links in the chat so people can check things out.
In a way, what you're saying is the more you get involved and the more you start getting into the rabbit hole, the easier it becomes to find the jobs and find the things that you're looking for.
For sure. But if you want, you can still do it the traditional way, like job boards, this sort of thing. So that still exists. But I mean, it's not the most organic way.
Awesome. Enrique, again, back to you. So when you decided to kind of jump ship from JP Morgan and join Dune Analytics, I'm sure you kind of looked at what was available and kind of made your decision. For someone that is coming into the Web3 space, how would you advise them in terms of kind of choosing where to go to and what companies or protocols or DAOs to join? Like how did you go about kind of evaluating your options and deciding on one? Is it different at all from kind of the typical Web2 way of doing it?
I think in general it is different. It was not different for me in particular, but I think, speaking generally, I think it's different. It's a different route. For me, it was more like I was actually, after JP Morgan, I was thinking of taking a sabbatical and use that time to contribute to some open source projects related to the blockchain. And while I was doing research, looking into tokens, into DAOs, into protocols, I stumbled upon Dune dashboard in one of the sites, and I clicked through, and then the rest is history. That's how I ended up in Dune Analytics. For me in particular, it was appealing because it was a perfect intersection between my experience on distributed database systems, on big companies and big data, and blockchain, and crypto. However, I think for most people who want to participate maybe on be Solidity developers, participate in creation of new protocols, tokens, DAOs, things like that, it's a different route. I think it's more about becoming involved in the communities, following Twitter, joining Discords, talking to people, see what's going on, and from there, many projects hire directly from Discord, for instance. So it is definitely a different route. It's much more about becoming. The first step is really becoming deeply involved in the crypto community. And from there, I think it's a natural step towards finding and identifying what works best for you. And here, I think your own personal values also play a role, about picking which project to choose. There's so many things to think about and think where you'd like to contribute to.
Awesome. Thank you for your perspective on this, Enrique. Ian, again to you. There's something that I would like to ask you. So you've already gave us the perspective from the recruitment point of view, like how do you recruit, like you're looking for trying to identify potential because you're not necessarily just kind of looking at the specific keywords because they're not there, and you have to kind of try to identify proxies for whether they will be successful in the Web3 space or not. But as an applicant, so let's say I'm now moving to the Web3 space and applying for positions. As an applicant, is it a different process? Like, what advice would you give to people that are applying to Web3 positions? Is the application playbook different, or is it more or less the same?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say it depends on the company. So, you know, we have a traditional job board. You can go to our job board, you can apply for a role. But I think the thing that's most different about the application process is that it's not as easy to find the things that are going on in Web3 as it is in Web2. At least in my opinion. In Web2, it's very much like, you know, I want to work for Facebook, I want to work for Google, I go to their website and I apply for whatever role I want to work for there. But in Web3, what I generally tell people is figure out first, like, who in the space is interesting to you, or what projects in the space are interesting to you, and then start pulling on those threads to like figure out what companies or individuals are working on those things. Because Protocol Labs, like when I first heard from them, I had no idea that they were working on IPFS and Filecoin. And that's because Protocol Labs, like a lot of companies in Web3, they don't spend a lot of time on recruitment branding per se. It's more so just like focusing on the technology and the work and the community around that work. But for someone trying to make that jump from Web2 to Web3, it's not as easy or traditional to sort of figure out that information as it is with other companies. So yeah, my point would be like, definitely figure out like what projects are interesting to you, who in the space, whether it's on Twitter or Discord, is like saying things that are interesting to you, and sort of keep pulling on those threads, see what communities they're involved in. Pedro mentioned a ton of great communities that you can be a part of to sort of start to learn about the space and like what companies are in the space operating in different ways. So yeah, that's how I'd say it's a little bit different as opposed to like just going to a job board and applying.
Thank you. So we have about kind of maybe 10 minutes more. I would like to give the opportunity to the attendants to ask questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to share them either on the Q&A or on the chat, and I'll put you up here. Otherwise, I'll move to my next questions. So any questions from the crowd? Okay, we have a question here. I'll probably just very briefly, we'll probably very briefly go through this one. So is it possible to share broadly what is Protocol Labs, IPFS, and Faber? So we covered that in most of the other sessions, but I'll just try to resume that very quickly. So Faber is a VC company based out of Portugal. No worries, you'll be able to see the recordings next week, but we're a VC firm based out of Portugal that invests in deep tech, early stage companies, mainly with 3 specific teams. So we tend to be specialized investors. 3 specific teams. One is AI data, and we have a team for that and advisors for that team. The other is Web3, again, specialized teams, specialized advisors. And the last one is climate tech, ocean tech, again, separate teams, separate advisors. So that's Faber in a nutshell. Ian, do you wanna kind of give the gist very briefly on Protocol Labs, IPFS, and Filecoin, by the way?
Yeah.
Very briefly, because we already covered that. So
yeah, so
minute.
Protocol Labs, obviously Web3 company, very well known in the space. We actually have a lot of different things that we're working on besides just IPFS, but IPFS specifically is basically just a file system, a protocol, peer-to-peer network for storing and sharing data in a distributed file system. And then we have Filecoin, the cryptocurrency that basically like incentivizes that distributed network. And I guess that's, I'll say for that, like leave it at that to have like a quick explanation. But I guess the way I would think about Protocol Labs as a whole is sort of like a Bell Labs of the 90s, where we're sort of like working on all these different technologies and research areas to like really drive forward, you know, a new version of the internet and humanity as a whole. So we have a lot of cool things we're working on here besides just IPFS and Filecoin. but again, if you want to reach out to me after the call, I can dive into that a lot more.
That's fine. We'll update the hackathon website as soon as we have the videos ready, and anyone can go there and check all the other sessions. That we go really deep into Filecoin, IPFS, and also Protocol Labs. Any more questions? No. Okay. Just to close this and to wrap it up, I would ask each of you, and Ian, you can go first. If you had to give just the top 5 advice that you could give to, or top 3, top 5, something along those lines, top advice that you would give a Web2, be it developer, engineer, product guy, designer, kind of, because we're all always talking about engineers and developers, but there's all sorts of people that are making the transition. So what are the top 5 pieces of advice that you would give someone that wants to kind of go to the Web3 space?
My top 20 pieces of advice for people.
That's a long list.
Yes, let's see if I can come up with 5 here. So the first one I would say is definitely start researching projects that you're interested in. So sort of what I alluded to earlier. So like start to learn about the space. What projects are exciting to you? You know, if it's IPFS or Filecoin or other things we're working on at Protocol Labs, that's great. But like start by researching the projects and figuring out what about this space is exciting to you. The second thing is I would start following or interacting with people in this space. I say following because I think of Twitter a lot. The Web3 community, the crypto community is very, very active on Twitter. So following the people that are exciting in this space to sort of start to learn about the space and be a part of the ecosystem and the environment. The third thing I'd say is like really start to like dip your toes into the space in different like basic ways. So like, I guess Pedro was posting a ton of links here. There was a link posted earlier about sort of a 101 in the blockchain space. Like YouTube is an incredible wealth of information to just like get up to speed on so many different technologies and companies. We post most of our engineering meetings and all hands on YouTube's. Like you can already pretend to be a part of Protocol Labs before even joining us by just participating a lot of what we have on YouTube. The fourth thing I would say is like, really just make sure from a technology skill set that you're trying out different things. That's another thing I alluded to earlier. So like if you have been stuck in Java for better or for worse for the last 10 to 15 years, like try experimenting with other technologies to like really round out your skill set. And then the fifth thing I would mention is specific to Protocol Labs. We do have a Launchpad program that we built out to accelerate talent from Web 2 into Web 3. It's a 6-week curriculum. I posted a link to it in the chat here, but if you are interested in sort of making that transition from Web 2 to Web 3 and getting paid to do it, we have a really cool curriculum to make that happen. As part of that process, we fly people somewhere in the world. There's a community building aspect of that. So the whole team's in Iceland right now, working on some bug fixing and other cool technology challenges. But yes, I'd check out that Launchpad too, or reach out to me if you want more information on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ian. Enrique, same thing. Top pieces of advice.
Okay, I only have 3. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
So, I mean, number one, of course, I think Ian mentioned this, is understanding the space. That should be the first step. This is a different world. And it's really important to, get a good, deep understanding of the technologies involved and everything involved. Research blockchain technologies, read the papers. Don't content yourself with cursory reading or superficial understanding of things, and try to understand DeFi, DAOs, tokens and the economics around tokens. All of that stuff is extremely important. And this is important in order to develop critical thinking. Critical thinking is always important to one's success, but here, because there's also so much noise, it's extremely important for you to be able to filter out the noise and be able to separate what's good, what's not good, what's important, what's not important. And number 2 is, again, connect with the community. join Discords, be active on Twitter, see what's going on in space. The rate of innovation is so intense that even just by reading the papers, the time you finish reading a paper, it's probably already obsolete, or someone has come up with a new protocol, new ideas. So it's really important to get a pulse of the community to follow what's going on. And number 3 is essentially, be creative. This is a space where everything is up for grabs. Many of things we take for granted, and many fundamental things can be rebuilt from scratch. We can do many new things in a fundamentally different way. And that's probably the top piece of advice, is that if you come into this space, just know that there will be plenty of room, plenty of opportunity to create something that is new, completely different, innovative, disruptive. And I think it's a big opportunity for everyone who wants to get into this space.
Thank you, Enrique. Pedro, same question. Top pieces of advice.
Sure, yeah. I only have a couple of them, to be honest. I mean, these guys already covered most of them.
Last guy to go is always tough.
Yeah, it's the toughest one. So a couple of them, be open to everything, really. It's really a brave new world, and that's fascinating. So fall in love with this concept and be okay with it. And the second thing is, take some time off every now and then, just to breathe, to relax, because it can be intense, especially as a founder. I feel this, but I think it goes to any contributor building in the space. Take some time off. It's okay. It's still early days. When you come back, a lot of things will change, but it's still early. So it's totally fine to take some time off. I think that's relevant to keep sanity. Otherwise, you can really fall down the rabbit hole, but in a negative way. So that's it.
Well, that was awesome. That was a great way to conclude and summarize what we discussed here today. I think we had an amazing panel. Thank you to the 3 of you for taking the time to spend it here with me and the participants in our hackathon. After this, so now we're going for a break. Afterwards, we're going to have a session on how to write a pitch for an accelerator. There's a context to that as well. So as I mentioned yesterday, we're not only doing this hackathon with Protocol Labs, but we're also going to be launching an accelerator, Falcon Accelerator, together with Protocol Labs. And some of the awards in this hackathon will give you an opportunity to be fast-tracked into the accelerator. So if you want to not only experiment and build a project for fun, but also potentially create a business out of it, the next session is definitely a must-watch. So thank you for now. We're going to go for a break, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.